Hey guys, welcome to Living the Logic. This is Manish Narayan. Today we're going to set up and Dockerize a set of containers. These containers are going to hold a VectorDB, which is an extension of PostgreSQL. It's also going to have a container for Ollama, which is a locally running container for hosting your models. And then finally, we're going to host a simple Python app that will basically take text, any text, pull down any model on Ollama, such as DeepSeek or Mistral or just any sort of simple embedding models, and it will basically create the embeddings for the text and then store it in the Postgres database table for embeddings. And let's see how that works. So the very first step, you're going to want to create a new directory for our work. So you can open up Visual Studio Code, choose C:\development. I'm going to create a directory and we'll name that Ollama VectorDB app. Okay, and hit enter. So it created that folder. So now we're going to head over. You can open file, open folder to that same location. Okay, now that that folder's open, you can head over to C:\development Ollama VectorDB app, and let's get started. All right, so the very first thing we're going to do in order to Dockerize everything, please make sure you have the latest version of Docker Desktop installed. You can go ahead and download and install that. If you don't already have it, I'm using version 4.39.0. I'm using the dark mode here, so please feel free to download Docker Desktop. Okay. Once you have Docker Desktop installed, what we're going to do is create our first file in our Ollama VectorDB app folder. And here I'm going to click on New File, and we're going to generate a Docker compose.yaml file. All right, so basically we're going to define all of our services, dependencies, and then we'll be able to run it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create a set of services. The first service we're going to have is a Postgres database. So I'm going to say Postgres. All right, and basically I'm going to say image, and here I'm going to say pull the latest image, so PGVector. And PGVector, and the version of Postgres I'm going to use 17. Okay, let's define our container name. It's going to be, let's call it Ollama Vector_DB. Okay, and then we'll say restart always, and then our environment. So this is very important. We're going to create our basically our credentials for our local Postgres server, okay, and database. So here I'm going to say environment. And we're going to create a Postgres user, okay, and that's going to be Ollama vector user. So Ollama vector user, okay, Ollama vector user, perfect. All right, and then I'm going to create a Postgres password. All right, and that's going to be Ollama vector_password. Okay, again, feel free to create your own user and password credentials. And then we'll name our DB, our Postgres database, DB, and that's going to be Ollama Vector_DB. Okay, great. Now, basically, I'm going to create volumes here. So we'll say dash, and we'll say PG_data, :var lib, PostgreSQL, okay, and data. All right, I'm also going to create an initDB script, a SQL script that will basically add our VectorDB extension and also create our embeddings table. Okay, so we can have that created as we kind of compose up our Docker instances. So what I'm going to do is say dash.initdb.sql. All right, that's the file I'm going to create in a second. Okay, and here we're going to say Docker entry point initdb.d, and then finally initdb.sql. All right, that's going to be our file we're going to run. All right, and then finally for our Postgres service, it's going to be exposed on ports by default 5432. Okay, so we're going to expose ports 5432. All right, great. Now we're going to go ahead. So basically, this is our Postgres service. I'm going to back up a bit, and now we're going to go ahead and create our Ollama service. Okay, so Postgres service is done. We're going to head over to our Ollama service. Let me just move this down a bit. All right. So basically we say Ollama. Okay. And again, image name is going to, the image we're going to pull is going to be Ollama. Okay. And the container name, that's going to be Ollama, very basic. And then restart, we'll say always. And then volumes, we'll create volumes for Ollama. So that's going to be Ollama underscore data root dot Ollama. Okay, and then the ports we're going to expose. So by default, Ollama is exposed on ports 11434. And if you probably saw my earlier videos, I did bring up Ollama and explain how to install that outside of Docker. But this is going to be purely through Docker. All right, so we have Ollama there, and our final service, is going to be our app. So let's go ahead and name that Python app. So we'll say our next service is Python app. Okay, and here I'm going to say build.Python app. Okay, and then the container name is going to be Python app underscore app. Okay, and we'll say restart no. Basically, it's going to run once then finish. It'll, grab the latest Ollama, pull the latest Ollama model or any model we define. It'll create the embeddings, print it out, and then basically that's about it for the app. So and so restart is no. Okay, and here we have a dependency. So this Python app is going to depend on first Postgres, and then also it's going to depend on Ollama. Okay. All right. Now let's create some environment variables for our Python app. Okay. So we have our PG host. It's going to be Postgres. Our PG user is going to be Ollama VectorDB, or sorry, vector user. And then our PG password is going to be Ollama vector password. And then our PGDB is going to be Ollama VectorDB. Perfect. And then we have one more, which is going to be our Ollama host. Okay, Ollama host. Now remember, since we're running all these services internally, it's going to have its own internal network. So instead of localhost, we'll be able to reach Ollama via the name, right? So Ollama on port 11434. Okay, that's going to be our container name, right? So that's about it for the environment variables for our Python app. Okay, next we'll create volumes. Okay, and it's going to be /Python app and app. Okay. All right, and then basically define a working directory. That's going to be /app. And command is going to be Python. And then we're going to create a file in there. And you'll see in a second, it's going to be called embedtext.py. Okay. All right, perfect. We defined our services. You notice here we have all of our services. And I'm going to define one more section for our volumes. Here we're going to have PG data underscore data and then Ollama data. Okay, I'm going to save that file. Okay, next we're going to remember create when the Postgres starts, PGVector starts, the Ollama VectorDB starts. We want to be able to run a script or execute a script automatically to create the vector and the embeddings table. So let's go ahead and add a new file here, and we're going to call that init-db.sql. Okay, and in here I'm going to say create extension if not exists. Again, this is Postgres syntax. Okay, and then we're going to say create table if not exists, and we're going to call that table embeddings to store our embeddings. Okay, put a semicolon there. All right, and we're going to have 3 columns. So basically ID. So it's going to be a serial primary key. Okay, and then we'll have a text. Okay, and that'll be text. not null. And then finally our embedding, which is going to be our vector type. And we'll say 768 for the size. Okay. That should do it for our SQL script. Okay, let me zoom in there so you guys can see that. Okay, let me zoom out a bit. Okay, there we go. All right. Next, we're going to create our Python app. Okay, so I'm going to define a new folder, and this is going to be called Python app. All right, in there, we're going to, the very first thing is we're going to have a Docker file. Okay, so go ahead and add a Docker file to Python app, and we're going to call that Docker file. All right, so basically we're going to say from, again, you can feel free to define your Python version. I'm going to say 3.10, working directory. All right, and this is going to be /app. And basically we're going to copy out the files. All right, and we're going to say requirements.txt. I'll define the requirements in a second. And then we're going to copy it to requirements.txt. Okay. And then we're going to basically run pip install all of our dependencies that are defined on a requirements text. So we'll say no cache dir requirements.txt. Okay, and we run the copy command dot, and then finally cmd. It's going to be Python, and then we're going to run a file called embedtext.py. Okay, I'm going to save that. All right, beautiful. Let's go ahead and define our requirements file. So I'm going to add a new file here, and we're going to call that requirements.txt. And we're going to have two requirements. Basically, we're going to have psychopg2 to connect to Postgres, and then requests to make an API calls. That's about it for the requirements text. And finally, we come to the main part, which is going to be our Python file. Okay. So what we want to do is add another file here, and we're going to name that embedtext.py. Okay. So we're going to have a few import statements. So import OS, import psychopg2 for the Postgres connection, import requests to make API calls, and then finally some JSON manipulation in case we need that. Okay. The first thing to do is define our Postgres connection parameter. So we'll say pghost equals os.getEnv, and here remember we defined our environment variables pghost. All right. And then we're going to have pguser os.getEnv. That's going to be pguser. And then basically pgpassword os.getEnv, and that's going to be pgpassword. Okay, and finally pg, the database name is going to be os.getEnv, and that's going to be pg_db. All right, perfect. Next, we're going to define our parameters or variables for Ollama. So we're going to say Ollama host. All right, os.getEnv, and we'll say Ollama host. Okay, and then we're going to define the embed URL for the Ollama API. Remember, Ollama is going to run on local port 11434. It has an embed URL to perform the embeddings, a tags URL to define what models have been pulled, and then finally a pull URL to pull the models. All right, so let's define those URLs. So we'll say Ollama embed URL equals, all right, and here we're going to define it as Ollama host, and then API/embeddings. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and copy this 2 more times here, and basically we have Ollama tags URL, and then finally a pull URL. Okay, so it's going to be tags and pull. Okay, perfect. All right. Now, again, the model you choose, feel free to use Mistral or Llama 3.2 or any sort of model you find relevant. I'm going to be just pulling a fast model. That will be basic, very basic to do embedding. So I'm going to say Ollama model equals nomic embed text. All right. So that's the model we're going to pull. All right. So when we run our Python app, the very first thing I want to do when this Python app runs in the container is to make sure and check if any models exist. In this case, nomic embed text. If it does not exist, go ahead and use the Ollama API to pull that model. All right, so let's go ahead and define a method for ensure Ollama model. Okay, so we're going to have a try catch, right? So basically, we're going to say response equal requests dot get, and we're going to pull all the current models that exist in Ollama. So Ollama tags URL. Okay. All right, and we basically grab the models from the response. So response.json, okay, dot get, and it's going to be models. All right. So now we check if the model we're after we want, which is defined in here, Ollama model. If that does not exist, let's go ahead and use the Ollama API to pull it. Okay, so basically I say if Ollama model not in models, okay, let's go ahead and print out. All right, we'll say model, model, and we'll say Ollama model, Ollama model not found. Okay, and then we'll say pulling the model. Dot, dot, dot. Okay. All right, now how do we pull it? So basically we'll say pull response equal, again, use a request dot post, and we're going to post to the Ollama pull URL. All right, and we'll pass it JSON, and basically it expects a name attribute, and that's going to be the name of the model, Ollama model. Okay, perfect. All right, so now that we've called the API to pull it, we're going to check the status code. So if pull response dot status code equals 200, all right, which is an okay, we'll just print out, say format here. We'll say model, Ollama model pulled successfully. Okay. All right. Else, basically, if there was some failure, we'll just print that out. So we'll say print, and we'll say failed to pull model, and we'll say Ollama model here. Okay, and we'll just give it a status code. So status, status, and we'll say pull response dot status code. All right, perfect. So we basically pull the model, all right, and once we're done with pulling the model, we have it running locally on our Ollama container, right? So if the model already exists, so we can just, if the model already exists, we'll just print that out. So we'll say else, print format, and we'll say else model, Ollama model already exists, right? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's make sure we close it. With accept, and we'll say requests dot exceptions dot request exception, request exception. All right, and as e, and we'll just print out the error in case we have any error here. So we'll say print, and we'll say error pulling model via Ollama API, and we'll just print the exception there. Okay, so we've defined, let me move this down a bit here. So we've defined our ensure Ollama model. All right, so when our service runs, it will actually grab it. So we need to invoke that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is basically just call this method. So we'll say ensure Ollama model, open close parentheses. Perfect. All right, next we're going to set up, before we're able to do anything with the embeddings, we need to open up a Postgres connection. So what we'll do is say connection equals using psychopg2.connect, and we'll pass it some parameters here. Our DB name, okay, DB name is going to equal PG underscore DB. All right, and then our user is going to be PG user, underscore user. There it is, and password is equal to PG underscore password. All right, and finally the host is equal to PG underscore host. Okay, let me exit out of there. Okay, perfect. We have our connection, and then basically we just use a connection to open a cursor. So connection.cursor. All right, let's go ahead and define now our embed text method. Okay, so how do we embed the text? Well, we depend on Ollama's model, and there's an embed URL. We make an API call and pass it our text, and then it should embed it, all right, and return the embeddings. So what I'm going to say is define embed text method, and we'll say text. Okay, so our payload is going to be basically our model. Okay, model. Okay, and we pass it Ollama model. Okay, and we give it a prompt, and that's going to be our text. Okay, so that's going to be the payload. And now we call the API. So we say request.post to Ollama embed URL, and basically pass it to JSON, the payload. All right, so again, we can check the response. So response.status code, if it's equal to 200, we'll say return, basically return the embeddings. So JSON, and we'll say get embedding. Okay, and else, if there's an error with the API call, we'll just print error embedding text. Okay, and we'll just print out the response text. Okay, response.text, and then return none. Okay, that's our embed text method. Very simple. Okay, basically calls Ollama model API, embed URL, and then returns the embedding. All right, so let's define some simple text we want to embed. So we'll say, hello, this is an example of text embedding using Ollama and PGVector. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and embed the text above. So we'll say embedding equals embed text. We call our method and pass in the text. Okay. Next, basically, if we get an instance of embedding, so if embedding, right? So if embedding, now we just basically use our Postgres connection to insert into the database table we've defined, right? So here we can say insert into embeddings. Columns are text and embedding, and values. Here we're going to basically pass in the parameters, 2 parameters. So create 2 parameters here, and returning, once we insert it, returning the ID that was generated, the unique ID. All right. Okay. And we pass it basically, let me escape out of this. All right, pass it the text and the embedding. Perfect. All right, and then we grab the inserted ID. So we just say cursor.fetch1. Oops. Okay, first column. Let me spell that right. That's inserted ID. All right. And then we just commit the statement, right? The code to SQL. So commit. And we'll just print out embedding stored successfully with ID, and we'll say inserted ID. All right, perfect. And then once we insert it, just to make sure the data was actually inserted, we're going to go ahead and select from that same table. So we'll say cursor.execute, and I'll say select ID text and the full embedding, the vectorized embedding from embeddings table, and we'll order by ID descending and limit 5. Okay. All right. Basically, now we just want to fetch all. So say rows equals cursor.fetch all. And we'll create a little output for what was selected. So we'll say new line 2, 3 equals, okay, stored embeddings, okay, and then we'll just loop through the rows here. So for row in rows, basically just print out ID, okay, so it's going to be row 0th right row and new line, and we'll say text, new line text. Oh, I forgot a bracket here. Okay, text, and then we'll say here row and 1. Okay, for the text. So we have ID text, right? And then we'll say new line embedding. Let's say truncated, because we know it's cut off a bit. And then we'll truncate it a little bit, right? So we don't want to print the whole vector output here on the display. So we'll say string. Basically grab the row to second index, right? And then we'll say 100, maybe 100 characters. Okay. And then we'll close that, and we'll say new line. Okay. So basically that's it. We're done. Basically now we can just at the end of the embedding, right? Business logic here. We're going to go ahead and close the Postgres connection, or close the cursor and now close the connection, right? And we'll just print out a final message. We'll say Python application finished successfully, exiting, ... Okay, and we'll basically exit. All right, let me check if there's any errors here. All right, so if we're good, if everything's good, and we'll find out once we have the container running. Basically, what I'm going to run is a Docker compose build method, right? So we're going to basically spin up our Docker container. So I'm going to say Docker compose up -d minus build. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Make sure every file is saved. Yeah, everything's saved. So I'm going to go ahead and run that command here. All right, and it might take a little bit of time to pull initially the Ollama image, right? So Postgres should be quick. Notice the Ollama image is roughly 1.7 gig. So once that's done, I'll show you what the container looks like on the output. All right, so it looks like it pulled Postgres and Ollama. All right, so we'll start to now build out the containers, right? And we should start to notice the Postgres. It's pulling down all the dependencies from the requirements.txt file, right? Our Python app. Once it's done building the Python app, we'll start to see our containers showing up on the Docker desktop. Okay, so we'll wait for that. It should be anytime soon. And remember, once you keep rebuilding this and keep rerunning, it'll be faster and faster because you're going to have stored images. The volumes will be set up already. And there we go. So notice it started to build everything here. Our network, our Ollama VectorDb PG data, right? A Postgres, Ollama VectorDB container, Ollama container, Python app container. So we have those three. We should see the three containers now. Perfect. If I see, there we go. So our Ollama VectorDB app, we have our Ollama container. We have our Ollama VectorDB container service, right? We have our Python app service, right? So if everything looks good, if I head over to Python app, we should see some logs being displayed here, right? Remember, we initially try to pull the model locally, and we should see something happening. All right, so let me head over to the main logs here. Okay, looks like Ollama VectorDB database system is ready to accept connections. Good, and then Ollama looks like it's good. So Python app. Oh, there we go. So Python app. Notice it didn't find the model here. It's pulling it. Great. Pull the model. All right, perfect. It actually took our text, embedded it using Ollama's model, and stored in our Postgres database table. And notice it did a select, yes, and it returned back the text. Hello, this is an example of text embedding using Ollama and PGVector. And notice it brought back the embedding. It truncated, of course, to 100 characters, but it brought back, you'll notice the vectors here. And the Python app finished successfully. All right. So basically, if you want to bring that back down, you can say docker compose down. Okay, it should stop everything. All right, now if I, again, hit the up arrow and start it up again, you'll see it'll run a lot faster this time. There we go. You see I already built everything and started the container, and boom, it actually finished. There we go. And it started a second embedding here. Okay, so ID 1 and 2. All right, well, I hope you have fun. I'll be happy to answer any questions. If you're stuck on any step, please be sure to like and subscribe the video, and more to come. See you next time. Hey guys, if you found the video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. See you next time.